your brain produces somewhere around 6,200 distinct thoughts every single day. That number comes from a study published in Nature Communications, where researchers at Queen's University in Canada used neuroimaging to track what they called thought worms, individual mental events flickering across the mind like sparks off a bonfire, around 6,200 thoughts. And most of them you never asked for. They just arrived. Opinions about what someone said to you at lunch, a half-remembered song from 15 years ago, worry about a bill, a craving for something sweet, an old argument replaying itself for no reason at all. Now, imagine this. What if someone told you to sit down, fold your legs, straighten your back, and do absolutely nothing about any of those 6,200 thoughts? Don't push them away. Do not follow them. Don't judge them. Don't fix them. Just sit. That, in its most distilled form, is Zazen. And it might be the most radical thing a human being can do. Welcome to Boring Zen. Tonight, we are going to spend a long, unhurried stretch of time with one of the oldest and most quietly powerful practices in human history, Zazen, the art of seated meditation. Now, the word itself is deceptively simple. Za means to sit. Zen is a Japanese rendering of the Chinese word Chan, which itself is a rendering of the Sanskrit word dhyana, meaning meditative absorption. So Zazen, at its most literal, just means sitting meditation, sitting and absorbing. That's it. But within that simplicity lives something so deep that monks have dedicated entire lifetimes to it. Masters have written libraries about it, and ordinary people across centuries and continents have found within it a kind of peace that no amount of thinking, planning, or striving could ever deliver. What we're going to do here is trace Zazen from its very beginning. From the historical Buddha sitting beneath a fig tree in northern India, through the dusty mountain caves of China, where a wild-eyed monk named Bodhidharma stared at a wall for 9 years, through medieval Japan, where a brilliant young monk named Dogen carried the practice across the sea and refined it into something extraordinary, all the way to modern meditation halls in San Francisco, New York, London, and small living rooms where people sit quietly before dawn, just breathing, just being. Along the way, we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the practice itself. How do you actually sit? What do you do with your legs, your hands, your eyes? What's happening with the breath? What on earth are you supposed to do with your mind? The very thing that won't stop chattering. We'll explore the two great streams of Zen meditation, Shikantaza and Koan practice. We'll step inside a Zen monastery and walk through the daily rhythms that have shaped practitioners for centuries. We'll look at what modern neuroscience has discovered about what Zazen does to the brain, and we'll talk about how all of this, every single piece of it, connects to your life right now, tonight, wherever you happen to be listening. So settle in. Get comfortable. Let the weight of whatever your day held begin to dissolve a little. This is going to be a long, slow, meditative journey, which is, kind of fitting when you think about it. Because Zazen itself is nothing if not a practice of patience, of staying, of not rushing to the next thing. And that word, staying, deserves a moment of its own. Because we live in an era that is, in almost every way, designed to prevent us from staying. Our phones buzz, our feeds scroll, our attention is pulled in 15 directions before breakfast. The average person checks their smartphone somewhere around 96 times a day, roughly once every 10 minutes during waking hours. Our entire digital architecture is built on the premise that stillness is boring and movement is engaging, that the next thing is always more interesting than this thing. That satisfaction lies around the next corner, after the next click, beyond the next notification. Zazen is, in the most fundamental sense, a rebellion against this. Not an angry rebellion, not a self-righteous stand against modernity, but a quiet, persistent turning toward what is actually here. It's an act of radical simplicity in a world drowning in complexity. You sit down. You stop reaching for the next thing. You stop performing. You stop consuming. You stop producing. For 30 minutes, or 45 minutes, or an hour, you simply exist. And in that simple existence, something extraordinary can happen. Not because you're trying to make it happen, but because, when you stop trying so hard, reality has a chance to show itself. There's a modern Zen teacher, Joko Beck, who used to say that Zazen is about experiencing the bare bones of this moment. Not the story about this moment, not the judgment about this moment, not the wish that this moment were different. Just this, the sound of the heater clicking on, the slight ache in your lower back. The cool air moves through your nostrils, the weight of your body pressing down on the cushion. These sensations are so ordinary that we normally dismiss them entirely, rushing past them towards something we consider more important. But in Zazen, these ordinary sensations become the entire universe. They become rich and vivid and sufficient. And here's what's strange and beautiful about that. When you stop treating ordinary experience as a stepping stone to something better, ordinary experience reveals itself to be extraordinarily alive. The breath becomes fascinating. The body becomes a landscape of subtle sensation. Silence becomes musical. Nothing special is happening, and yet everything is happening. This is one of the great paradoxes of Zazen. By doing less, you experience more. There's a teaching that comes up again and again in Zen, and it goes something like this. The way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. That line comes from a poem attributed to the third Chinese Zen patriarch, Senkan, written sometime in the late 6th century. And it captures something essential about what we're going to explore tonight. Zazen is not about achieving a special state. It's not about getting somewhere. It's about dropping the whole project of getting somewhere and discovering what's already here. Which sounds easy, right? Just sit there, don't do anything. But anyone who has ever tried to simply sit still for even 5 minutes knows that it is, paradoxically, one of the hardest things you can do. And maybe that's exactly what makes it worth doing. The human impulse toward stillness, toward quieting the noise inside, is ancient. You can find it in every culture, on every continent, woven through every spiritual tradition that has ever existed. But Zazen occupies a particular place in that long human story. It isn't visualization. It isn't mantra repetition, although some forms of Zen do incorporate those elements. It isn't guided imagery or progressive relaxation. In its purest form, Zazen strips away every technique, every method, every goal, and asks you to just be present with whatever is happening. Right here, right now, the Zen master Shunryu Suzuki, who brought Soto Zen to America in the late 1950s, once said something that captures this perfectly. He said that in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. That idea, beginner's mind, is not just a nice concept. It's the living heart of Zazen. Every time you sit down as if for the first time. You don't carry yesterday's meditation into today's. You don't compare this sit to your best sit. You just sit, fresh, open, like a child who has wandered into a sunlit clearing and has no agenda whatsoever except to be there. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. To really understand Zazen, to feel its weight and texture and depth, we need to go back, way back, to a time before the word Zen existed, before there was a Japan to receive it or a China to refine it. We need to go back to a young man sitting beneath a tree, determined not to stand until he had seen through to the very root of human suffering. Let's begin there, somewhere around 250 years ago. Give or take a century, depending on which scholarly tradition you follow. A young man sat down beneath a large fig tree in a place called Uruvela, in what is now Bodh Gaya, in the northeastern Indian state of Bihar. His name was Siddhartha Gautama. He was roughly 35 years old, and he had been searching for something for a very long time. The story of Siddhartha's early life has been told in countless ways, through scripture, through art, through film, through the quiet oral traditions of Buddhist monasteries stretching from Sri Lanka to Tibet. The essential outlines are familiar to many. He was born a prince of the Shakya clan in a small kingdom in what is now southern Nepal. His father, King Suddhodana, sheltered him from the harsh realities of the world, surrounding him with luxury and pleasure in an attempt to keep him content within the palace walls. But Siddhartha, as the stories tell it, eventually encountered what are called the foresights. An elderly person bent with age, a person ravaged by disease, a corpse being carried to the cremation grounds, and a wandering ascetic who seemed to radiate a calm that none of the first three figures possessed. These encounters shattered Siddhartha's sheltered worldview. He saw, perhaps for the first time with true clarity, that aging, sickness, and death awaited every living being, including himself, including everyone he loved. And he saw, in the figure of the ascetic, the possibility that there might be a way through that suffering, a way beyond it. So he left. He left his palace, his wife, and his newborn son. He left behind his inheritance, his comfort, and everything that most people spend their entire lives trying to accumulate. He shaved his head, put on rough robes, and walked into the forests of northern India to find the answer to a single, burning question. What is the root of suffering, and how can a human being be free of it? For 6 years, Siddhartha searched. He studied with the most renowned meditation teachers of his era. He mastered deep states of meditative absorption, what the Indian tradition calls samadhi. He practiced with a group of 5 ascetics, subjecting his body to extreme austerities, fasting until his spine could be felt through his abdomen, sitting motionless in scorching heat and freezing cold, denying himself sleep, food, comfort of any kind, and none of it worked. He achieved extraordinary states of concentration, yes, but when those states faded, the fundamental questions remained unanswered. Suffering was still there, waiting. And then something shifted. Some accounts describe it as a memory. Siddhartha recalled a moment from his childhood when he had been sitting beneath a rose apple tree during a plowing festival. Without trying, without any technique or discipline, he had fallen into a natural state of meditative ease. He was present, aware, content, not because he had achieved anything, but simply because he was there, fully there, without resistance. That memory became a turning point. Siddhartha realized that the path to liberation might not be through extreme denial any more than it was through extreme indulgence. It lay somewhere in the middle, in presence, in awareness, in the simple act of sitting and seeing clearly. He left the ascetics. He accepted food. He bathed. And then he walked to a large ficus religiosa tree, which would become known as the Bodhi tree, the tree of awakening. According to Buddhist tradition, he sat down beneath it and made a vow. He would not rise from that seat until he had penetrated to the deepest truth of existence. What followed, according to the Pali Canon and other Buddhist scriptures, was a night of extraordinary inner confrontation. The demon Mara, a figure representing delusion, desire, and the fear of death, is said to have assailed Siddhartha with everything at his disposal. Armies of demons attacked. Mara's 3 daughters, representing desire, discontent, and delight, tried to seduce him. Weapons were hurled, storms unleashed, temptations offered, but Siddhartha sat unmoved, watching it all arise and pass away like clouds across an empty sky. And here's the key detail, the one that connects this ancient story directly to the practice of Zazen. Siddhartha didn't fight Mara. He didn't resist. He didn't build a wall against the onslaught. He simply sat and observed. He remained present with whatever arose, without grasping at it, without fleeing from it, without adding a single story or judgment to the raw experience. And as dawn broke, after what tradition tells us was a period of deep meditation lasting up to 49 days, Siddhartha Gautama saw the morning star and experienced complete awakening. He became the Buddha, the awakened one, and the specific method of his awakening, the actual practice he was doing beneath that tree, was seated meditation. Now, it's important to note that the Buddha didn't invent meditation. Seated meditation practices existed in India long before Siddhartha was born. The yogic traditions, the Jain traditions, various schools of Brahmanical philosophy all had their own forms of contemplative practice. What was distinctive about the Buddha's approach was its particular combination of elements: calm abiding, what later traditions would call shamatha, and insight, what they would call vipassana; stillness and seeing, calm and clarity, the 2 wings of a bird, as later teachers would describe it. The Buddha spent the remaining 45 years of his life teaching this path. He taught it to monks and nuns, to kings and farmers, to merchants and outcasts. He taught it in deer parks and bamboo groves, and on the peaks of sacred mountains. And at the center of all his teaching, through all its variations and elaborations, was this essential instruction: sit down, observe your experience directly, and see for yourself the nature of reality. Don't take anyone's word for it, not even his. This practice, this radical act of sitting and looking inward, traveled outward from the plains of India in waves. It moved south to Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia, forming the basis of what became Theravada Buddhism. It moved north into Central Asia, along the ancient trade routes of the Silk Road, carried by monks and merchants and wandering teachers, and eventually, sometime around the 1st century of the Common Era, it began to enter China. There, in a culture already steeped in the philosophical traditions of Taoism and Confucianism, seated Buddhist meditation would undergo a profound transformation. The Chinese would take this practice and reshape it, deepen it, and give it a character all its own. And the figure at the center of that transformation, at least according to legend, was a monk with bulging eyes, a thick beard, and a fierce determination that bordered on the absurd. His name was Bodhidharma, or, well, that was the name he was known by in China. The historical details of Bodhidharma's life are, let's say murky would be a generous description. Scholars have debated for centuries about when exactly he lived, where exactly he came from, and which of the many stories attributed to him have any basis in historical fact. What we do know, or at least what the earliest Chinese biographical sources suggest, is that he was a Buddhist monk who came from somewhere in the Western regions, a term that could mean Central Asia, Persia, or the Indian subcontinent. He arrived in China sometime during the 5th or 6th century of the Common Era, and he brought with him a form of meditation practice that would change everything. The most famous story about Bodhidharma, the one that has been painted and sculpted and retold in temples across East Asia for over 1,000 years, goes something like this. After arriving in China, Bodhidharma had an audience with Emperor Wu of the Liang dynasty. Emperor Wu was a devoted Buddhist patron. He had built temples, funded monasteries, commissioned the copying of sutras, and sponsored the ordination of thousands of monks. He was, by any external measure, a model Buddhist ruler. So when this strange foreign monk appeared before him, the emperor naturally asked, "I have built temples and given to the monastic community. What merit have I earned?" And Bodhidharma replied, "No merit whatsoever." The emperor was stunned. He tried again. "What is the highest meaning of the holy truths?" Bodhidharma answered, "Vast emptiness, nothing holy." "Then who is standing before me?" the emperor demanded. "I don't know," Bodhidharma said. Unable to penetrate this exchange, the emperor dismissed the monk, and according to legend, Bodhidharma then crossed the Yangtze River and traveled north to Shaolin Monastery, where he sat down facing the wall of a cave. And there he stayed for 9 years. 9 years of facing a wall, not teaching, not writing, not engaging in philosophical debate, just sitting, facing a blank stone surface, breathing, being. This practice became known as Biguan or wall gazing, and it became the foundational image of Zen meditation. To this day, in the Soto Zen tradition, practitioners sit facing the wall during Zazen, an echo of Bodhidharma's legendary practice. Now, what was Bodhidharma actually doing during those 9 years? The earliest texts associated with him describe his practice in terms of 2 entrances to the path. The first was called entrance by principle, which involved a direct encounter with the nature of reality itself, going beyond dualistic thinking to recognize that self and other, holy and ordinary, are not fundamentally separate. The second was entrance by practice, which involved 4 specific approaches: accepting whatever suffering arises without resentment, remaining equanimous in the face of both good and bad fortune, having no desires or cravings, and aligning one's conduct with the reality of things as they are. The wall, in this understanding, was not just a physical object to stare at. It was a symbol. In East Asian culture, a wall represents something immovable, uncompromising, solid. It also, paradoxically, opens in 2 directions. You can stand on either side. So the wall became a metaphor for non-duality, the dissolution of the barrier between self and other, between the one who meditates and the thing being meditated upon. To sit like a wall means to sit with complete stability, complete presence, without wavering, without negotiating with your discomfort or your boredom or your desire to be somewhere else. There's a famous legend that during those 9 years, Bodhidharma fell asleep. Furious with himself, he tore off his own eyelids and flung them to the ground. Where they landed, the first tea plants sprouted. This story is, of course, almost certainly apocryphal, but it carries a truth within it. The connection between tea and Zen meditation is ancient and deep. For centuries, monks have used tea to support their practice, to maintain wakefulness during long hours of sitting. The story of Bodhidharma's eyelids is a colorful way of encoding that history. Eventually, according to tradition, a student came to Bodhidharma. His name was Huik, and he would become the 2nd patriarch of Chinese Zen. The story of their meeting is one of the most dramatic in all of Buddhist literature. Huik came to the cave where Bodhidharma sat, and he waited outside in the snow, requesting to be accepted as a student. Bodhidharma ignored him. Huik waited and waited, the snow piling up around him. Finally, in a gesture of desperate sincerity, Huik is said to have cut off his own left arm and presented it to Bodhidharma as proof of his determination. Only then did Bodhidharma turn from the wall and accept him. Whether any of this actually happened is, honestly, beside the point. These stories function as teaching tools within the Zen tradition. They communicate the intensity, the single-mindedness, the total commitment that Zen practice asks of its practitioners. They tell us that this path is not casual. It's not a hobby. It asks for everything. What is historically more reliable is that Bodhidharma's teachings, whatever their exact content, took root in China and began to grow. Over the following centuries, Chinese masters refined and developed the practice of seated meditation within a distinctly Chinese framework. The Indian concept of dhyana merged with Taoist ideas about naturalness, spontaneity, and harmony with the way. The result was Chan Buddhism, the Chinese ancestor of Japanese Zen. the great Chinese Chan masters of the Tang dynasty. Figures like Huineng, the sixth patriarch, and Ma Zudai and Linji Yixuan developed a tradition that was vigorous, earthy, and sometimes shockingly direct. They shouted at students. They hit them with sticks. They answered profound philosophical questions with absurd responses. "What is the Buddha?" a student asks. 3 pounds of flax, the master answers. This was not random. It was a deliberate strategy to bypass the thinking mind and provoke a direct experience of reality. And through it all, through the shouts and the blows and the paradoxical exchanges, Zazen remained at the center. The sitting practice, the foundation. Everything else, the koans, the rituals, the teacher-student encounters, were all, in a sense, extensions of what happened on the cushion. But it would be in Japan, centuries later, that Zazen would receive perhaps its most thorough and systematic articulation. And that articulation would come from a young monk who traveled to China seeking the truth and came back carrying it in his bones. The centuries following Bodhidharma saw an explosion of creative spiritual energy within Chinese Chan Buddhism, the tradition that Bodhidharma had planted, with its emphasis on direct experience over textual study, on meditation over ritual, on the living encounter between teacher and student over the dead letter of doctrine, flowered into one of the most vibrant and original spiritual movements in human history. The figure who most shaped the trajectory of early Chan was Huineng, traditionally honored as the sixth patriarch. Huineng's story, as told in the Platform Sutra, is one of the great narratives of Zen. He was, according to tradition, an illiterate woodcutter from the south of China, as far from the educated monastic elite as one could imagine. Yet, when the fifth patriarch, Hongren, held a poetry contest to determine his successor, it was Huineng's verse that demonstrated the deepest understanding. The story goes that the head monk, Shengxiu, wrote on the monastery wall, "The body is the Bodhi tree. The mind is like a bright mirror stand. At all times, we must strive to polish it and must not let the dust collect." This verse reflected a gradual approach to practice, the idea that enlightenment is achieved through persistent effort, slowly cleaning the mirror of the mind until it shines. Huineng's response turned this understanding on its head. He wrote, "Originally, there is no tree of enlightenment, nor is there a stand with a bright mirror. From the beginning, not one thing exists, so where could dust collect?" This verse pointed to a more radical understanding that the mind is already pure, that there is nothing to polish, nothing to achieve, nothing to clean. Awakening is not something you build toward. It is something you recognize as already present. Whether this exchange actually happened in precisely this way is, again, a matter of historical debate. But the two poems crystallized a tension that would run through the entire history of Zen, the tension between gradual cultivation and sudden awakening, between the idea that practice leads to enlightenment and the idea that practice is enlightenment. Huineng's lineage produced some of the most remarkable teachers in the history of Buddhism. Ma Zudai, who lived in the 8th century, was famous for his unconventional methods. He would shout at students, strike them, twist their noses, and answer their most earnest philosophical questions with seemingly absurd responses. When a monk asked him, "What is the Buddha?" Mazu replied, "This very mind is the Buddha." When the same monk came back later with the same question, Mazu said, "No mind, no Buddha." He was not contradicting himself. He was pointing beyond the words to the reality that no formulation can capture. Mazu's student, Beijing Huihai, established the monastic code that would define Chan community life for centuries. His famous day of no working, day of no eating rule ensured that meditation and manual labor existed side by side, that the monk's life was grounded in physical reality, even as it reached toward the infinite. Beijing also formalized the structure of the Chan monastery, creating the distinct roles and daily schedules that would eventually be carried to Japan and refined into the Zen monastic tradition we know today. Then there was Linji Yixuan, the fiery 9th century master who founded the lineage that would become Rinzai Zen in Japan. Linji was famous for his intensity and his directness. He developed a teaching style built around confrontation, around pushing the student beyond their comfortable understanding into a direct encounter with reality. His shouts and blows were not expressions of anger, but tools of liberation. Shock tactics designed to jolt the student out of their habitual patterns of thinking and into the immediate, vivid present. Linji also articulated one of the most famous and frequently misunderstood statements in all of Zen. "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him." This is not, obviously, a call to violence. It is a radical declaration of spiritual independence. It means, don't cling to any external authority, not even the Buddha. Don't worship concepts. Don't idolize teachers. The truth is not out there, in some figure to be followed or some teaching to be memorized. The truth is here, in your own direct experience. And if you project it onto someone else, you have missed it entirely. Alongside the Linji lineage, the Kayadong lineage, named after its founders Dongshin Lianji and Kayoshin Benji, developed a quieter, more contemplative approach where Linji emphasized sudden awakening through dramatic encounters. Kayadong emphasized what Dongshin called the 5 ranks, a sophisticated framework for understanding the relationship between the absolute and the relative, between emptiness and form. Dongshin's teaching was subtle, nuanced, and deeply poetic. He is famous for his verse about the jewel mirror samadhi, in which he describes a state of awareness that reflects reality perfectly, like a mirror that shows every detail without adding or subtracting anything. The Kayadong school would eventually be carried to Japan and become the Soto school. The Linji school would become Rinzai. Both schools carried Zazen at their center. Both understood seated meditation as the foundation of everything else, but their emphases differed, and those differences would shape the 2 distinct flavors of Zen that practitioners encounter today. All of this history, all of these teachers and their students and their students' students were bound together by a single practice: sitting down, crossing the legs, straightening the spine, and being present. The cultural expressions changed. The languages changed. The metaphors and teaching styles and institutional structures evolved over centuries. But the act of Zazen, The act of seated meditation remained the unbroken thread connecting them all. His name was Dogen Zenji, and what he did with Zazen changed the course of Buddhist history. Dogen was born in Kyoto in the year 1200 during the Kamakura period of Japanese history, a time of political upheaval, social change, and intense spiritual seeking. By most accounts, he was an extraordinarily precocious child. His mother died when he was young. Some sources say 7 or 8 years old, and the experience of her death left a deep mark on him. Watching the incense smoke rise during her funeral, he is said to have felt, with sudden and piercing clarity, the impermanence of all things. That moment planted a seed that would eventually grow into one of the most remarkable spiritual careers in East Asian history. Dogen entered monastic training early. He studied on Mount Hiei, the great Tendai Buddhist center above Kyoto, immersing himself in the vast and complex teachings of the Tendai school. But a question began to gnaw at him, a question that none of his teachers could answer to his satisfaction. If, as Buddhist teaching states, all beings already possess Buddha nature, if awakening is already our fundamental condition, then why do we need to practice? Why meditate? Why subject ourselves to the rigors of monastic discipline? If we're already enlightened, what are we doing? This question drove Dogen out of the Tendai establishment and into the newly emerging Zen traditions that were taking hold in Japan. He studied briefly at Kenninjai, one of the first Zen temples in Kyoto, founded by the monk Eisai, who had brought Rinzai Zen back from China. But Dogen was still unsatisfied. His question burned in 1223. At the age of 23, Dogen made the dangerous sea voyage to China. He would spend the next 4 years there, training in Chinese Chan monasteries, seeking a teacher who could resolve his great doubt. He found that teacher in Tiantong Rujing, the abbot of Tiantong Monastery. Rujing was a stern and uncompromising master in the Caodong lineage, the Chinese ancestor of what would become Soto Zen. He emphasized one thing above all else: Zazen, pure, direct, goalless sitting. He called it Zhiguan Dazuo, which translates roughly to just sitting. Nothing else. No special techniques. No seeking after experiences. Just sitting under Rujing's guidance. Something shifted in Dogen. The story goes that during an early morning meditation session, Rujing noticed a monk dozing and thundered at him. The practice of Zazen is the dropping away of body and mind. What do you expect to accomplish by doing? When Dogen heard these words, the dropping away of body and mind, something broke open in him. He went to Rujing's room, lit incense, and bowed. Rujing asked him what he was doing. Dogen replied that body and mind had dropped away. Rujing confirmed his experience, but warned him not to cling to it. You have dropped body and mind. Now dropping body and mind. This phrase, Shinjin Datsuraku, the dropping away of body and mind, would become one of the central concepts of Dogen's teaching. It points to an experience in which the usual sense of being a separate self, a self that has a body and a mind, a self that is meditating, simply dissolves. What remains is not nothingness, but a vivid, boundless awareness that is not located anywhere in particular. that does not belong to anyone in particular. That simply is. Dogen returned to Japan in 1227. Among his very first acts was to write a short text called Zazen, universally recommended instructions for Zazen. It is one of the most beloved and frequently chanted texts in the Soto Zen tradition, and it is, in essence, Dogen's love letter to the practice of sitting meditation. The text begins with a seeming paradox. The way is fundamentally perfect and all-pervading, Dogen writes. How could it depend upon practice and realization? If everything is already complete, why sit? But Dogen then addresses this directly. Even though reality is perfect as it is, we human beings get lost. We develop preferences. We get caught in the gap between how things are and how we wish they were. And Zazen is the practice of closing that gap, not by changing reality, but by seeing it clearly. The Zazen then gives detailed practical instructions. Find a quiet room. Eat and drink moderately. Let go of all concerns. Do not think of good or evil. Put aside the operations of your intellect, your volition, your consciousness. Sit on a thick mat with a round cushion. Fold your legs. Place your right hand on your left foot, your left hand on your right palm, thumbs lightly touching. Sit upright. Neither lean to the left nor to the right. Ears aligned with shoulders. Nose aligned with navel. And then comes the critical question, what to do with the mind. Dogen's instruction here is deceptively simple. Think of not thinking. How do you think of not thinking? Non-thinking. This in itself is the essential art of Zazen. Think of not thinking. How? Non-thinking. This is not a riddle. Or rather, it is a riddle, but one that can only be solved by doing it, not by figuring it out intellectually. Non-thinking, or hishirio in Japanese, is neither thinking nor the suppression of thinking. It is a state of open awareness in which thoughts may come and go, but there is no one grabbing onto them, no one pushing them away, no one keeping score. It is the mind in its natural condition before we start meddling with it. Dogen was emphatic that Zazen is not a technique for achieving enlightenment. It is not a means to an end. In what may be his most radical teaching, Dogen declared that practice and enlightenment are one and the same thing. The very act of sitting in Zazen, of assuming the posture and the attitude of a Buddha, is itself the expression of enlightenment. You don't do Zazen to become a Buddha. You do Zazen as a Buddha, or as he put it in one of his most famous formulations, Zazen is not learning meditation. It is the Dharma gate of ease and joy. It is the practice realization of totally culminated enlightenment. This was a revolutionary claim, and it set Soto Zen apart from many other Buddhist traditions, including the Rinzai school, which tended to view meditation as a means of progressing toward a breakthrough experience of awakening. For Dogen, there was nowhere to progress to. The sitting itself was the arrival. Every moment of Zazen, whether it felt profound or boring, whether the mind was clear or clouded, whether the legs ached or the body felt light, every moment was complete in itself. Dogen went on to found Eihei-ji, one of the two head temples of the Soto Zen school, in the remote mountains of Echizen province, far from the political intrigues of Kyoto. There, in the cold mountain silence, He and his monks devoted themselves to a life of Zazen. They sat before dawn. They sat after evening chanting. They sat during session, intensive multi-day retreats where meditation consumed nearly every waking hour, and Dogen wrote prolifically. His masterwork, the Shabogenzo, the treasury of the true Dharma eye, is one of the most profound and challenging works in all of Buddhist philosophy. A vast collection of essays exploring the nature of time, being, practice, and reality itself. But for all his intellectual brilliance, Dogen always returned to the same simple point. Just sit. Everything you need is already there. You don't need to add anything. You don't need to take anything away. Just sit. Now, with that history breathing behind us, let's get into the actual practice. Let's talk about what it means, physically and tangibly, to sit Zazen. Because while the philosophy is deep and the history is rich, Zazen is, above all, a physical practice. It lives in the body. It starts with the body. And if you get the body right, everything else tends to follow. The first thing to understand about Zazen posture is that it is not about achieving some idealized image of a serene meditator. It is not about forcing your body into a shape that looks good in a photograph. It is about creating a physical foundation that is stable, grounded, alert, and sustainable. The posture of Zazen is the posture of someone who is fully present and fully alive. Someone who is neither collapsed in on themselves nor rigidly braced against the world. It is the posture of a mountain, rooted and still, but not dead, alive and breathing, but not restless. Let's start from the ground up. You begin by finding a place to sit. Traditionally, this is on the floor, on a firm mat called a zabuton. The zabuton provides cushioning for the knees and ankles and defines your personal meditation space. On top of the zabuton, you place a round cushion called a zafu. The zafu elevates the hips, which is crucial because it allows the pelvis to tilt forward slightly, which in turn allows the spine to stack naturally on top of it in an upright position without muscular strain. Now, the legs. There are several possible positions, and here's something important. All of them are equally valid for practice. The gold standard, at least in terms of stability, is the full lotus position. In full lotus, each foot rests on the opposite thigh, soles turned upward. The legs create a locked, triangular base that is extraordinarily stable. But full lotus requires significant flexibility in the hips, knees, and ankles. And for many people, especially those of us raised in cultures where we sit in chairs rather than on the floor, full lotus can be uncomfortable or even harmful to force. Half lotus is a common alternative. Here, one foot rests on the opposite thigh, while the other foot is tucked beneath the opposite leg, resting on the floor or the mat. This provides a good balance of stability and comfort. Then there's the Burmese position, where both legs are folded in front of the body, with both feet resting on the floor, one in front of the other. This is often the most accessible position for Western practitioners. There's also seiza, or kneeling, which can be done straddling the zafu or using a meditation bench. And finally, there is sitting in a chair, which is a perfectly acceptable option for anyone who finds floor sitting difficult or painful due to physical limitations. The key point: regardless of which leg position you choose, is that both knees should ideally make contact with the floor or the mat. This creates a tripod, with the two knees and the base of the spine as the 3 points. And this tripod gives the body its stability. When the base is stable, the upper body can be upright without effort. When the base is unstable, the muscles have to work to keep you from toppling over, and that tension accumulates quickly. Once the legs are settled, attention moves to the pelvis and spine. You want to sit on the front third of the zafu, not the center. This allows the hips to tilt forward naturally, creating a gentle curve in the lower back, what anatomists call lumbar lordosis. This curve is natural and healthy. It's the shape your spine wants to be in when you're upright. From this base, the spine stacks upward, vertebra upon vertebra, like a column of stones. Not rigid, not forced, but upright, reaching. There's an image that some teachers use. Imagine a string attached to the crown of your head, gently pulling you toward the ceiling. Or, if you prefer, imagine that your head is a helium balloon floating upward, and your body simply hangs from it naturally. The chin tucks in slightly, which elongates the back of the neck and brings the head into alignment with the rest of the spine. The ears should be roughly in line with the shoulders. The nose should be roughly in line with the navel. Now, the shoulders, let them drop. Let them fall away from the ears. So many of us carry tension in the shoulders, pulling them up around our ears as if bracing for impact. In Zazen, the shoulders relax and open. The chest is neither puffed out nor collapsed. It is, just naturally open. The whole torso has a quality of dignified ease. Alert, but not tense. Relaxed, but not slumped. The hands are held in what is called the cosmic mudra, or Hakai join in Japanese. This is a specific hand position that is distinctive to Zazen. To form the cosmic mudra, place your dominant hand palm up, resting in your lap, or on the soles of your feet if you're in full lotus. Then place the other hand palm up on top of the first, so that the middle knuckles overlap. Now touch the tips of the thumbs together lightly. The hands form an oval shape, a kind of egg, and this oval rests against the lower belly, just below the navel, at the energy center known as the hara in Japanese, or danshan in Chinese. The cosmic mudra is not just a decorative gesture. It serves several functions. First, it turns the attention inward toward the center of the body. Second, it acts as a kind of biofeedback device. When the mind wanders, when attention scatters, the shape of the mudra tends to change. The thumbs might press together too tightly, or they might drift apart. The oval might collapse or distort. By maintaining awareness of the mudra, you maintain a subtle, continuous thread of attention throughout the sitting. It's a gentle anchor. Let me pause here and talk about something that doesn't get mentioned nearly enough in discussions of Zazen posture: discomfort. Because the truth is, especially when you're starting out, Zazen can be physically uncomfortable. Your knees might ache, your ankles might go numb, your lower back might burn, your shoulders might tighten into knots. And sitting with that discomfort, without fidgeting, without adjusting, without giving in to the powerful urge to shift your weight or uncross your legs, is a significant part of the practice. This is not masochism. Zen practice is not about enduring pain for its own sake. And if you're experiencing sharp, acute pain, especially in the knees, you should absolutely adjust your position. Damaging your body is not Zazen, but the ordinary discomfort that arises from sitting still, the dull aches, the pins and needles, the stiffness. That discomfort is actually a profound teacher. Here's why. When discomfort arises, what does the mind do? It panics. It starts telling stories. This is terrible. I can't stand this. My knee is being destroyed. I need to move right now or something bad will happen. The mind treats the sensation as an emergency, as something that must be fixed immediately. And what Zazen asks you to do is pause, to take a breath, to actually look at the sensation itself, not the story about the sensation, but the raw physical feeling. And when you do that, something interesting often happens. The sensation is still there, but the suffering around it diminishes. The ache is still aching, but you're no longer fighting it, no longer layering stories of catastrophe on top of it, no longer clenching against it. And in that loosening of resistance, the entire experience transforms. This is a microcosm of the Buddha's central teaching about suffering. The first noble truth is not that life is pain. It's that life involves dukkha, a term that encompasses suffering, dissatisfaction, the inherent unsatisfactoriness of trying to hold onto things that are constantly changing. The second noble truth identifies the cause of dukkha as craving, clinging, resistance, the mind's habitual push and pull against reality as it is. And the insight that Zazen offers, directly, physically, is that when you stop pushing and pulling, when you stop resisting and clinging, the suffering loosens its grip, not because the circumstances have changed, but because your relationship to them has shifted. Over time, as the body adapts to sitting, the physical discomfort tends to decrease. The hips open, the back muscles strengthen, the legs become accustomed to the position. But even experienced practitioners encounter discomfort, especially during long sessions or session. And each time it arises, it offers the same teaching. Can you be with this? Can you be present with what's actually happening, without running away, without fighting, without telling yourself a story about why it shouldn't be happening? This is practice for life, because life is full of discomfort, not just physical discomfort, but emotional discomfort, psychological discomfort, the discomfort of uncertainty, the discomfort of loss, the discomfort of not getting what we want, and the capacity to sit with discomfort, to meet it with openness and curiosity rather than resistance and fear, is one of the most valuable skills a human being can develop. Zazen trains that capacity, one aching knee at a time. The eyes. In Zazen, unlike many other meditation traditions, the eyes are kept open. Well, partially open. The gaze is lowered at about a 45-degree angle, resting on the floor or the wall a few feet in front of you, without focusing on anything in particular. The eyelids are relaxed, half closed, creating a soft, unfocused visual field. This is important. Closing the eyes completely tends to invite drowsiness and internal fantasy. Opening them wide tends to create alertness that can tip into agitation. The half-open position strikes a balance, present to the visual world, but not engaged with it. In, not caught by the outside. Out, not lost inside. The mouth is gently closed. The tongue rests against the upper palate, just behind the front teeth. This small detail reduces the need to salivate and swallow, which can be distracting during long periods of sitting. It also, according to traditional understanding, closes an energetic circuit in the body, connecting what Chinese medicine calls the governing vessel and the conception vessel. And then there is the breath. The breath in Zazen is not something you control. Let me say that again, because it runs contrary to many meditation instructions you might have encountered. In Zazen, you do not control your breath. You don't force it into a particular rhythm. You don't try to breathe deeply or slowly or in any particular pattern. You simply breathe naturally, the way your body wants to breathe when you're not interfering with it. That said, there are some qualities of Zazen breathing that tend to emerge naturally when the posture is correct. The breath tends to slow down. It tends to deepen, settling into the lower abdomen, into the hara. The exhalation tends to become longer than the inhalation, not because you're making it longer, but because when the body is truly relaxed and upright, it naturally lets go of air more slowly. The belly moves gently with each breath, expanding on the inhale, softening on the exhale. The chest remains relatively still. The breath moves, in a sense, from below, from the earth, from the deep center of the body. In the Soto Zen tradition, the official instructions from the Soto school say simply, breathe through the nose. Do not try to control your breath. Let it come and go naturally. When various thoughts arise, do not become caught up by them or struggle with them. Neither pursue them nor try to escape from them. Just leave thoughts alone, allowing them to come up and go away freely. However, many teachers do offer preliminary breath counting practices to help beginners develop concentration. The most common method is to count each exhalation from 1 to 10. Breathe in, breathe out, 1, breathe in, breathe out, 2, and so on up to 10, and then start over. If you lose count, which you will, you simply return to 1 and begin again. No judgment, no frustration, just return. This practice, called Suzokyuken in Japanese, is not the ultimate form of Zazen, but it is an extraordinarily useful tool for training attention. It gives the mind something to do, a simple task that keeps it anchored in the present moment without requiring any complex thought. A step beyond counting is simply following the breath, called Suisokyuken. Here, you drop the numbers and simply ride the wave of each breath. In, out, feeling the sensation of the air entering and leaving the nostrils, or the rise and fall of the belly. This requires a bit more concentrated attention because there's less structure, less scaffolding to hold the mind in place. And beyond even that, in the fullness of shikantaza, the breath is not given any special attention at all. You don't count it. You don't follow it. You don't even particularly notice it. It simply happens, the way your heart beats or your hair grows, as a natural process of a body that is alive and sitting. Your awareness is not directed at the breath or at anything in particular. It is simply open, present, available to whatever arises. But we should be careful here. These are not stages in a hierarchy, where counting breath is for beginners and shikantaza is for advanced practitioners. Different teachers have different views on this. Some, like Dogen himself, seem to suggest that shikantaza is the only authentic form of Zazen, and that counting or following the breath is a lesser practice. Others, like the great modern teacher Shunryu Suzuki, taught counting the breath as a regular part of practice, even for experienced sitters. The important thing is not which method you use, but the quality of attention you bring to it. If you're counting breaths with complete, wholehearted presence, that is Zazen. If you're sitting in shikantaza, but actually just daydreaming, that is not Zazen. The form matters less than the spirit within the form. There's a beautiful phrase that captures this: harmonizing body, breath, and mind. In the traditional understanding, these three elements, body, breath, and mind, are not separate things. They are three aspects of a single reality. When the body is upright and stable, the breath naturally becomes calm and deep. When the breath is calm and deep, the mind naturally becomes settled and clear. And when the mind is settled and clear, the body naturally maintains its posture without effort. They support each other like three legs of a stool. Remove anyone, and the whole thing collapses. This is why Zazen instruction always begins with the body, not with philosophy, not with ideas about enlightenment, not with instructions about what to think or not think. It begins with, how are you sitting? Is your back straight? Are your shoulders dropped? Are your hands in the mudra? Because if the physical foundation is sound, the rest, the breath, the mind, will tend to take care of themselves. And there's something profoundly humbling about this. In a world that prizes the intellect, that values complexity and sophistication, and the ability to think our way through problems, Zazen begins by telling us to sit down and pay attention to our posture, to notice whether our left knee is touching the floor, to feel the gentle pressure of our thumbs together. It brings us back to the most basic, most immediate level of experience, the body, here, now, breathing. So the body is settled, the breath is flowing. And now we arrive at what is, for most people, the real challenge of Zazen, the mind. If you've ever tried to sit still for even 5 minutes, you already know what happens. The moment you resolve to be present, the moment you commit to just sitting and just breathing, the mind goes wild. It's like a puppy that has been let off its leash in a park full of squirrels. Thoughts scatter in every direction. You think about what you're going to eat for dinner. You remember an email you forgot to send. You replay a conversation from 3 days ago. You start planning your weekend. You notice a sound and construct an entire narrative about what it might be. You suddenly remember the name of your second-grade teacher for absolutely no reason. And then you remember that you're supposed to be meditating, and you feel a little flash of frustration or guilt, and you try harder. And then trying harder generates more tension, which generates more thoughts, and the whole cycle spirals. This is completely normal. This is not a sign that you're bad at meditation. This is what minds do. Minds think. That is their function. Just as eyes see and ears hear and the stomach digests, the mind produces thoughts. Asking the mind not to think is like asking the eyes not to see. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of how the system works. And here is where Dogen's instruction becomes so brilliantly precise. He doesn't say, stop thinking. He doesn't say, empty your mind. He says, think of not thinking. And when asked how to do this impossible thing, he answers, non-thinking. Non-thinking, or hishirio, is not the absence of thought. It is not a blank, empty, lobotomized state. It is what the Zen tradition sometimes describes as the mind before thinking kicks in. Not before it in time, but beneath it in depth. It's the wide, open sky behind the clouds. The clouds are there, yes. Thoughts drift across, feelings arise and dissolve. Sensations flicker, but none of it sticks. None of it defines the space. The sky doesn't change because a cloud passes through it. And you, sitting in Zazen, don't change because a thought passes through your mind. Well, let me put it another way. Have you ever been watching a river flow past? You're sitting on the bank, and the water moves by, carrying leaves and sticks and bits of foam. You see all of it. You're aware of all of it, but you're not jumping in and grabbing things. You're not trying to stop the current. You're not getting upset because the river is flowing. You're just watching, present to the movement, but not caught by it. That's non-thinking. That's the mental quality of Zazen. Now, this is much easier to describe than to do. In practice, what happens is that you sit down, you settle into your posture, you bring attention to the breath or to the open field of awareness, and within seconds, you're gone, swept away by a thought. Maybe a memory, maybe a plan, maybe a fantasy. And the extraordinary thing is that you often don't even realize it's happened. You're 5 minutes into an elaborate mental movie about something that hasn't occurred yet, and you suddenly wake up and realize you've been completely lost. This moment of waking up, this moment of recognizing that you've been distracted, is actually the most important moment in the entire practice. Not the moment of perfect stillness, not the moment of deep peace, if such a moment comes, but the moment of coming back. Because that moment, that tiny instant of awareness, is the practice. That's the muscle you're building, the ability to notice that you've wandered and to return gently, without judgment, without drama, to the present moment. And then the next thought comes, and you wander again, and you come back again, and again, and again. The Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck compared this to training a puppy. You put the puppy on the newspaper and say, stay. The puppy runs off. You put it back. It runs off. You put it back. You don't yell at the puppy. You don't punish it. You just patiently, gently return it to where it belongs. 1,000 times if necessary. And slowly, gradually, the puppy learns to stay. In the Soto Zen tradition, this basic approach, this goalless, methodless sitting with open awareness, is the essence of shikantaza. The word itself breaks down beautifully. Shiken means nothing but or just. Ta means precisely or exactly. Za means sitting. So shikantaza is nothing but precisely sitting. Not sitting and meditating, not sitting and seeking enlightenment, not sitting and trying to be a good Buddhist, just sitting. Nothing more, nothing less. Shikantaza was the term used by Dogen's teacher, Tiantong Rujing, and Dogen adopted it wholeheartedly. But the roots of this practice go even further back, to to the Chinese Caodong master Hongzhi Zhengzhu, who lived in the 12th century and articulated a form of meditation he called silent illumination. Silent because the mind is at rest, not churning with activity. Illumination because awareness is vivid and clear, not dull or drowsy. The two qualities together, silence and illumination, stillness and clarity, describe the ideal state of the Zazen mind. Hongzhi used gorgeous language to describe this practice. He wrote about sitting so still that the mind becomes like a bright mirror, reflecting everything without holding anything. He spoke of an awareness so vast and clear that it encompasses the entire universe without grasping at any part of it. These are not metaphors for something otherworldly. They are descriptions of what actually happens when a human being sits with complete presence and complete openness. But well, here's the thing. Shikantaza is also, famously, extremely difficult, precisely because there is no object of focus, no technique to lean on, no structure to hold the mind in place. It requires an extraordinary degree of internal stability and wakefulness. Without those qualities, just sitting can very easily slide into just daydreaming, or just spacing out, or just napping. The great Rinzai Zen master Dahui Zongo, a contemporary of Hongzhi, was highly critical of silent illumination practice for exactly this reason. He called it silent illumination Zen heresy, and accused its practitioners of sitting like dead trees, cultivating a blank stupor rather than genuine awakening. This criticism has merit, and serious Zen practitioners have always taken it seriously. Shikantaza is not passive. It is not relaxing. It is, as one teacher described it, like sitting in the center of a clearing in the forest, knowing that ultimate danger is about to strike, but not knowing what form it will take or from what direction it will come. There is an intensity to genuine shikantaza, a quality of heightened alertness that is worlds away from the popular image of blissed-out meditation. And this brings us to the other great stream of Zazen practice, the koan. If shikantaza is the wide open sky, the koan is the thunderbolt. If shikantaza is a still lake, the koan is a stone dropped into its center. A koan is, well, it's hard to define precisely because koans resist definition by their very nature. In the simplest terms, a koan is a question, a story, a dialogue, or a statement drawn from the Zen tradition that cannot be resolved through ordinary logic or intellectual analysis. It is a puzzle that the rational mind cannot solve, and that is exactly the point. The koan forces the mind beyond its usual patterns, beyond the familiar grooves of conceptual thinking, into a territory where something else becomes possible. The most famous koans are probably familiar to you, at least in passing. What is the sound of one hand clapping? That's from the Japanese master Hakuin Ekaku, who lived in the 18th century and was instrumental in revitalizing the Rinzai school. Then there's the koan known as Joshu's dog. Does a dog have Buddha nature? The master Zheju answered, Mu. Mu means no or nothing, but it's not a philosophical statement. It's a gateway. Students of Rinzai Zen are often assigned this koan as their first. Just sit with Mu, breathe Mu, be Mu. Let mu consume your entire awareness until there is nothing left of the one who is contemplating mu. The use of koans in Zen practice developed primarily within the Rinzai tradition, though many Soto teachers also work with koans. The Chinese teacher Dahui Zhangao, the same one who criticized silent illumination, was a major proponent of what he called huitu practice, which involves focusing intensely on the word head or critical phrase of a koan. In this method, you take a single phrase, often just one or two words, like mu or what is this, and you hold it in your awareness during meditation, turning it over and over, not with the thinking mind, but with your whole being. The goal is to build up what Zen calls great doubt, an intense, pressing, all-consuming questioning that eventually breaks through the walls of ordinary consciousness. In formal Rinzai training, koan practice is structured and systematic. A student begins with an initial breakthrough koan, usually mu or the sound of one hand. They sit with this koan during Zazen, sometimes for months or years, until they have a direct experiential insight into it, what the tradition calls kensho, seeing one's true nature. The student then presents their understanding to the teacher in a private interview called Zazen or Dokusen. This is not a philosophical discussion. The teacher is looking for evidence of genuine direct experience, not intellectual cleverness. If the student's presentation is unsatisfactory, the teacher may send them back to keep sitting, sometimes with a shout, a slap, or the abrupt ringing of a bell. Once the student has penetrated their first koan, the teacher assigns another and another. The traditional Rinzai koan curriculum, which was systematized by Hakuin and his successors, consists of several hundred koans organized into categories of increasing subtlety. Working through the entire curriculum can take decades. Now, an important note: koans are not riddles with clever answers. They are not logic puzzles or brain teasers. You cannot solve a koan the way you solve a crossword. The answer to a koan is not a verbal formulation. It is a demonstration of understanding, an expression of awakened awareness that might take the form of a word, a gesture, a shout, a silence, or even an action. The famous koan collections, the Gateless Gate, the Blue Cliff Record, the Book of Equanimity, are filled with exchanges that seem baffling from the outside, but are, within the tradition, recognized as expressions of profound realization. What's fascinating is that despite the apparent differences between shikantaza and koan practice, many experienced teachers see them as complementary rather than opposed. Jan Chosen Bays, a teacher trained in both Soto and Rinzai approaches, has described koans as a mysterious and diabolical device for drilling down through layers of delusion, while shikantaza is the practice of letting go of the ego's involvement in doing meditation with a goal. The two approaches work on different aspects of the same fundamental problem, the problem of a mind that is identified with itself and its constructions, and that therefore cannot see reality as it is. In many contemporary Zen communities, especially in the West, practitioners have access to both methods, and teachers may assign koan work or recommend shikantaza depending on the needs of the individual student. The Sanbo Kyodan lineage, founded by Yasutani Hakun Roshi, is a well-known example of a school that combines elements of both Soto and Rin's practice. But regardless of whether you're sitting shikantaza or concentrating on a koan, the physical foundation is the same. The posture is the same. The eyes are open. The back is straight. The breath is flowing. And the practitioner is there, fully present, meeting whatever arises with attention, honesty, and courage. Zazen is, in one sense, something you can do alone. You can sit in your bedroom, in a park, or on a train. You can practice on a mountaintop or in a closet. The Buddha himself achieved awakening sitting by himself under a tree, but there is something about practicing with others, about sitting together in silence. That amplifies the practice in ways that are hard to explain, but immediately apparent to anyone who has experienced it. The traditional space for communal zazen is called a zendo, which simply means meditation hall. In a Japanese Zen monastery, the zendo is the heart of the training. It is a large, clean, uncluttered room with raised platforms along the walls, each platform holding a zabuton and zafu for each practitioner. In Soto Zen temples, the sitters face the wall. In Rinzai temples, they face each other with their backs to the wall. Both arrangements have their own character. Facing the wall eliminates visual distraction and turns the attention inward. Facing each other creates a sense of shared vulnerability and accountability, because everyone can see everyone else. The atmosphere in a zendo during zazen is well. It's unlike anything else. There is silence, yes, but it's not an empty silence. It's a living, breathing silence, thick with the presence of many bodies and minds engaged in the same practice. You can hear the soft rustle of fabric, the occasional creak of a floorboard, the distant sound of wind or birds, but there is no talking, no whispering, no eye contact. Each person is in their own world and simultaneously part of something larger. In Zen monasteries, the daily schedule is built around zazen. A typical day at a Soto Zen monastery in Japan begins well before dawn, often at 3:30 or 4 in the morning. The wake-up bell sounds, and within minutes, the monks are in the zendo, seated and still. The first sitting period may last 30 to 50 minutes, followed by a period of kinhin, or walking meditation. Kinhin is zazen in motion. The practitioners stand, place their hands in a specific position called shashu, where one hand clasps the thumb of the other at waist height, and walk slowly around the zendo, usually in a clockwise direction. Each step is deliberate, coordinated with the breath. It's not a break from zazen, it's an extension of it. The same quality of presence, the same uprightness, the same open awareness, only now the body is moving. After kinhin, there is another period of zazen, followed by morning chanting services, which might include the recitation of the Heart Sutra, the chanting of the lineage of teachers, and various dedicatory verses. Then comes breakfast, which in traditional Zen monasteries is eaten in the zendo in a ritual called oryoki. Oryoki is a formal, choreographed meal practice in which each person eats from a set of nested bowls, following precise movements and gestures that have been passed down for centuries. The food is simple: rice, pickles, and soup. The practice is silent, focused, and deeply meditative, Every action, from unwrapping the bowls to cleaning them with hot water at the end, is done with complete attention. After breakfast comes work practice, called Samu. In Zen, work is not separate from meditation. Cleaning the floors, tending the garden, chopping vegetables, repairing the temple buildings. All of these are opportunities to bring the attention cultivated in Zazen into the activities of daily life. The Zen tradition has a long history of valuing physical labor. One famous Chinese master, Beijing Huihai, established the rule that a day without work is a day without eating, a principle that set Zen monasteries apart from other Buddhist communities where manual labor was often looked down upon. The afternoon might include more Zazen, study, and perhaps a teisho, a formal Dharma talk given by the abbot or a senior teacher. Teisho is not a lecture or a sermon in the Western sense. It is a direct expression of the teacher's understanding, often arising from a commentary on a koan or a passage from a classical text. Students listen in the same posture they use for Zazen, upright and still, receiving the teaching not just with their intellects, but with their entire bodies. Then comes the most intense experience that Zen training has to offer: sesshin. Sesshin is a multi-day meditation intensive, typically lasting 3, 5, or 7 days, during which participants devote themselves almost exclusively to Zazen. The word sesshin can be translated as touching the heart-mind or collecting the mind. During sesshin, the normal routines of daily life are stripped away. There is no talking, no reading, no writing, no phone calls, no emails, no distractions of any kind. Wake up is often at 4:30 in the morning or earlier, and the day is structured around 10 to 12 hours of seated meditation, broken up by periods of kinhin, meals, short rest periods, and occasional talks by the teacher. The physical demands of sesshin are significant. Sitting motionless for so many hours, day after day, can produce intense pain in the legs, back, and shoulders. The reduced sleep, typically 4 to 6 hours per night, can lead to fatigue and disorientation. Emotionally, sesshin can bring up powerful feelings: grief, anger, fear, joy, loneliness, love. Without the usual distractions to suppress or redirect these emotions, they surface with startling force. And yet, something extraordinary happens in sesshin, usually around the 3rd day. As the mind finally exhausts its repertoire of distractions, as the restlessness begins to settle, a deep quietness opens up. It's not a blank or empty quietness. It's vivid, alert, almost luminous. Some practitioners describe it as feeling like the first time they've truly been awake. Others describe a sense of boundaries dissolving, the walls between self and other becoming transparent. The sound of a bird becomes indistinguishable from their own awareness. The pain in their knee becomes interesting rather than unbearable. Time stretches and compresses in unusual ways. A 40-minute sitting period feels like 5 minutes or 5 hours. At many Zen centers, the most important session of the year is Rohatsu Sesshin, held in early December in commemoration of the historical Buddha's enlightenment. Rohatsu Sesshin is traditionally the most rigorous of the year. At some temples, the schedule begins at 3:30 in the morning and continues until 11 at night. On the final night, many practitioners sit through the entire night without sleeping, in echo of the Buddha's all-night meditation beneath the Bodhi tree as dawn breaks on December 8th, the date traditionally associated with the Buddha's awakening. The bell rings and the session ends. Practitioners bow to each other, often with tears in their eyes, and return to the world of speaking and moving and eating and doing, carrying with them whatever they have touched during those days of silence. During session, practitioners typically have regular opportunities for private interviews with the teacher. In the Rinzai tradition, these are called Zazen or Dokusen, and they are the occasion for presenting one's understanding of a koan. In the Soto tradition, the interview, often called Dokusen as well, is a more open-ended meeting in which the student can discuss any aspect of their practice. These private meetings are considered essential to Zen training. A book can tell you about Zazen, but only a living teacher can see where you're stuck, challenge your assumptions, and push you beyond what you think is possible. Now, for most of its long history, Zazen was practiced almost exclusively in East Asian monasteries. It was the province of monks and nuns who had dedicated their lives to Buddhist training. Lay people might participate occasionally during special temple events or short retreats, but the deep, sustained practice of Zazen was a monastic affair. That began to change dramatically in the 20th century, when Zen crossed the Pacific and entered the cultural life of the West. The story of how Zen came to America and Europe is complex and fascinating. It involves scholars, artists, soldiers, beatniks, hippies, and eventually, serious practitioners who established training centers and lineages that continue to flourish today. The first significant wave of Western interest in Zen came through the work of scholars and translators. Daisetsu Teitaro Suzuki, a Japanese Buddhist scholar who is not to be confused with Shunryu Suzuki, spent decades introducing Zen philosophy to Western audiences through his books and lectures. D.T. Suzuki held seminars at Columbia University in the 1950s that attracted intellectuals, artists, and writers, including the psychoanalyst Erich Fromm, the composer John Cage, and the poet Allen Ginsberg. Through D.T. Suzuki's work, Zen entered the Western intellectual mainstream, becoming associated with spontaneity, creativity, and a kind of liberated awareness that appealed enormously to the counterculture. But D.T. Suzuki's presentation of Zen was primarily intellectual and philosophical. It was Alan Watts, the British-born writer and speaker, who popularized Zen for a much broader audience. Watts's books, particularly The Way of Zen, published in 1957, introduced millions of readers to Zen ideas and practices. Watts was a brilliant communicator, but he himself was not a practicing Zen monk, and some within the Zen tradition have criticized his presentation as being more about the idea of Zen than the actual practice of Zazen. But the story of Zen's westward journey doesn't begin in the 20th century. It has earlier, quieter roots that are worth mentioning, because they remind us that the human hunger for stillness and presence has never been limited to any one culture. As early as the 17th century, European travelers to Japan and China brought back accounts of Buddhist meditation practices. Jesuit missionaries, in particular, were fascinated and troubled by what they observed in Zen monasteries. Here were monks who seemed to achieve through sitting meditation a kind of interior peace and self-mastery that rivaled anything in the Christian contemplative tradition. The encounter was complex, marked by mutual admiration and mutual suspicion, but it planted seeds of cross-cultural awareness that would bear fruit centuries later. In the 19th century, the Theosophical movement, with its eclectic interest in Eastern religions, brought Buddhist ideas to a wider Western audience. Colonel Henry Steele Olcott and Helena Blavatsky traveled to Sri Lanka and formally became Buddhists, an extraordinary gesture for the time. While Theosophy's understanding of Buddhism was often superficial and mixed with other esoteric traditions, it opened doors that would later allow more authentic transmissions to take place. Then came the World's Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893, a landmark event that brought representatives of the world's spiritual traditions together for the first time on American soil. Among the delegates was Soyen Shaku, a Rinzai Zen master, who delivered a talk on Buddhist practice that captured the imagination of many who heard it. Soyen Shaku returned to the United States in 1905, spending a year in San Francisco and traveling across the country by train, stopping to give talks and classes along the way. He was, by all accounts, a remarkable presence, embodying the kind of quiet authority and calm vitality that Zen practice cultivates. Soyen Shaku's most important contribution, however, may have been indirect. It was through his encouragement that his student, D.T. Suzuki, began the scholarly and literary work that would introduce Zen to the Western intellectual world. D.T. Suzuki spent decades translating texts, writing books, and lecturing at universities, creating a body of work that, whatever its limitations, served as the gateway through which millions of Westerners first encountered Zen. The Beat generation of the 1950s seized upon Zen with characteristic enthusiasm. Jack Kerouac's novel The Dharma Bums, published in 1958, presented a romanticized vision of Zen-inspired living that captured the imagination of a generation. Gary Snyder, who appears as a character in the novel, and who would later spend years training in a Japanese Zen monastery, brought a more authentic and grounded understanding to the movement. Allen Ginsberg, Philip Whalen, and other Beat poets all engaged with Zen in various ways, weaving Buddhist imagery and ideas into their work. But the Beat's relationship with Zen was complicated. Many within the Zen tradition felt that the Beat interpretation was superficial, more interested in the aesthetics of spontaneity and rebellion than in the actual discipline of Zazen. D.T. Suzuki himself, while sympathetic to the Beat's energy, reportedly expressed concern about the tendency to equate Zen with intellectual freedom and artistic license, rather than with the rigorous, sustained practice that he knew it to be. It was into this cultural ferment, this mixture of genuine seeking and romantic projection, that Shunryu Suzuki arrived in 1959. The person who brought authentic Zen practice to American soil in a deep and lasting way was Shunryu Suzuki. Born in Japan in 1904, Suzuki was a Soto Zen priest who arrived in San Francisco in May of 1959 at the age of 55. He had come to serve as head priest of Sokoji, a small Soto Zen temple in Japantown that mainly served the Japanese American community. He expected to stay for a few years before returning to Japan. He never went back. What happened was this. Suzuki started offering morning Zazen at Sokoji, sitting quietly in the pre-dawn darkness with whoever showed up. And people showed up. Not the older Japanese congregation who were accustomed to a more ceremonial form of Buddhism, but young Americans, beatniks, seekers, people who had read Alan Watts and D.T. Suzuki and who were hungry for the real thing. They came and sat with Shunryu Suzuki, and something about his presence, his warmth, his absolute sincerity drew them in. Word spread through the San Francisco counterculture. More people came. By the early 1960s, Suzuki's Western students had grown into a community large enough to found the San Francisco Zen Center, which would become one of the most influential Buddhist institutions in the West. In 1967, Suzuki oversaw the establishment of Tasajara Zen Mountain Center in the Ventana Wilderness area of Central California, the first Soto Zen training monastery established outside of Asia. Later, the San Francisco Zen Center would add a third practice site, Green Gulch Farm, a beautiful organic farm and temple in Marin County. Shunryu Suzuki's approach was, in many ways, revolutionary. He didn't simplify Zen or water it down for Western consumption. He taught authentic Zazen in the same forms and with the same rigor as it was practiced in Japanese monasteries, but he communicated it with a warmth, a humor, and an accessibility that made it feel welcoming rather than forbidding. His talks, collected and published in 1970 as Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, became one of the most widely read books on Zen in any language. The book is deceptively simple. It talks about posture, about breathing, about how to hold the mind during Zazen. But beneath its simplicity lies a profound understanding of what practice is and what it asks of us. Suzuki died in December of 1971, just a year after Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind was published. He was 67 years old, and he had been in America for 12 years. In that relatively short time, he had planted seeds that would grow into a vast and thriving Western Zen community. Today, the San Francisco Zen Center and its affiliates, along with dozens of other Zen centers and monasteries that trace their lineage back to Suzuki's students and their students, continue to offer Zazen instruction and intensive training to thousands of practitioners. Suzuki was not the only teacher to bring Zen to the West, of course. Taisen Mizumi Roshi founded the Zen Center of Lowe's Angels. Robert Aitken Roshi established the Diamond Sangha in Hawaii. Seung San brought Korean Zen, called Sion, to Providence, Rhode Island. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen master, introduced a gentle and socially engaged form of Zen to millions through his books and retreat centers. And in Europe, Taizan Deshimaru brought Soto Zen from Japan to France, establishing a network of practice centers across the continent. Each of these teachers brought their own style, their own emphasis, their own personality to the practice, but at the center of all their teaching was Zazen. The same Zazen that Dogen taught at Ihijai. The same Zazen that Bodhidharma practiced facing his cave wall. The same Zazen that the Buddha practiced beneath the Bodhi tree. The forms varied. The cultural containers varied. But the essence, sit down, be still, pay attention, remained unchanged. And now, in the 21st century, science has begun to investigate what happens inside the human body and brain when someone sits Zazen. The results are fascinating, though it is important to approach them with the same spirit of open inquiry and healthy skepticism that characterizes the best Zen practice. The scientific study of meditation began in earnest in the late 1950s and 1960s, when researchers started using electroencephalography, or EEG, to measure the brain wave activity of Zen monks during Zazen. Among the earliest studies were those conducted by Akira Kasamatsu and Tomio Hirai, Japanese researchers who published their findings in 1966. They found that experienced Zen practitioners showed distinctive patterns of brain activity during meditation, an increase in alpha waves, which are associated with relaxed wakefulness, followed by a gradual shift into theta waves, which are associated with deeper states of relaxation and meditative absorption. These patterns were different from both normal waking consciousness and sleep, suggesting that Zazen produces a unique state of alert relaxation that doesn't fit neatly into the usual categories. More recent research, using advanced brain imaging technologies like functional MRI or fMRI and positron emission tomography or PET scans, has provided even more detailed pictures of what Zazen does to the brain. One of the most significant findings involves what neuroscientists call the default mode network, a set of brain regions that are active when we're not focused on any particular task. When the mind is wandering, daydreaming, ruminating, or thinking about itself, the default mode network is essentially the neural basis of the chattering mind, the inner narrator that constantly comments on our experience and constructs our sense of self. Research conducted by Giuseppe Pagnoni at Emory University found that experienced Zen meditators showed reduced activity in the default mode network during Zazen, and that they were able to return to a state of focused attention more quickly after being distracted than non-meditators. In other words, Zazen appears to quiet the part of the brain that is responsible for mental wandering and self-referential thinking. This aligns remarkably well with the traditional description of Zazen as a practice that reduces the monkey mind, the restless, chattering quality of untrained consciousness. Other studies have found that regular meditation practice is associated with increased gray matter density in regions of the brain involved in learning, memory, emotional regulation, and self-awareness. A study published in Neuroscience Letters reported that Zen practitioners had increased gray matter in areas associated with emotional regulation and self-control. Research from Alberto Chiesa, summarizing the literature on Zen meditation, noted that increased theta activity in advanced meditators helped relax various regions of the brain, while also reducing stress and lowering blood pressure. He also suggested that Zen meditation practice could protect against cognitive decline, usually associated with aging, and might enhance antioxidant activity. A 2018 study published in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience examined the effects of a 7-day Zen meditation retreat on brain function. Researchers used fMRI to measure the performance of meditators compared with non-meditators before and after the retreat. Using a task that required attention and impulse control, they found that the retreat appeared to modulate brain activity in regions associated with cognitive control, particularly in the meditators who already had a regular practice. The neurologist and Zen practitioner James Austin has spent decades investigating the relationship between Zen practice and brain function. His 1998 book, Zen and the Brain, was a groundbreaking work that brought together neuroscience and contemplative practice in a way that had not been attempted before. Austin's research has focused on how long-term Zen practice appears to alter the brain's processing of self-related information, potentially weakening the brain's tendency to construct and maintain a fixed sense of self. This is, of course, precisely what Zen practitioners have been reporting for centuries. That Zazen leads to a loosening of self-referential thinking and an opening into a more spacious, less self-centered way of experiencing the world. There's another fascinating area of research that connects to Zazen: the study of pain perception. Multiple studies have found that long-term meditators have a different relationship to pain than non-meditators. Not that they feel less pain, interestingly, but that they suffer less in response to it. A study at the University of Montreal found that experienced Zen meditators actually showed greater sensitivity to pain stimuli than non-meditators. They reported higher intensity ratings for the same stimuli, but they found the pain less unpleasant. Their brains processed the sensory signal normally, but showed reduced activity in the regions associated with emotional reactivity and suffering. This finding is remarkably consistent with the traditional Zen understanding of how Zazen changes one's relationship to discomfort. Zazen doesn't numb you to pain. It doesn't make the pain go away. What it does is separate the raw sensation from the emotional and cognitive overlay, the stories, the resistance, that this is terrible and I need it to stop reaction that turns simple pain into suffering. When you can feel the pain without fighting it, the experience is qualitatively different. The sensation may actually be sharper and more vivid, but the suffering is reduced because you're not layering meaning and resistance on top of it. This has significant implications beyond the meditation cushion. Chronic pain, which affects tens of millions of people, is increasingly understood as a phenomenon that is shaped as much by the brain's interpretation of signals as by the signals themselves. Fear, anxiety, catastrophizing, and the anticipation of pain all amplify the experience of suffering. If Zazen can reduce these amplifying factors without numbing awareness. It offers a genuinely new approach to one of the most pervasive health challenges of our time. Research has also explored the relationship between meditation and aging. A study led by Sarah Lazar at Harvard Medical School found that meditators had more gray matter in certain brain regions compared to age-matched controls, and that the age-related differences in cortical thickness were less pronounced in the meditators. This suggests, tentatively, that meditation might help slow the natural thinning of the cortex that occurs with aging. Other research has found that meditation practice is associated with longer telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of chromosomes that shorten with age, and are considered a biomarker of cellular aging. Again, these findings need to be interpreted carefully. The studies are observational. The sample sizes are often small, and there are many confounding variables that are difficult to control for, but taken together, the body of evidence suggests that the practice of Zazen and meditation more broadly has measurable effects on the structure and function of the brain and body. Effects that are broadly consistent with what practitioners have been reporting for centuries. Dr. James Austin, the neurologist and Zen practitioner whose work we touched on earlier, has proposed a model for understanding the neurological changes that accompany Zen training. He suggests that Zazen, practiced over time, gradually shifts the balance of activity in the brain away from the self-referential networks, the parts that maintain our sense of being a separate I, with its needs and fears and desires, and toward networks that support a more direct, unmediated experience of reality. This shift, Austin argues, is the neural correlate of what Zen practitioners call losing the self, or forgetting the self, Dogen's famous phrase. To study the self is to forget the self. Whether or not Austin's specific model proves correct in all its details, the general direction of his thinking represents a remarkable convergence of ancient wisdom and modern science. For thousands of years, Zen masters have taught that liberation comes from letting go of the illusion of a fixed, separate self. Now, neuroscientists are beginning to identify the brain circuits that create and maintain that illusion, and to show how meditation practice can alter their activity. The language is different. The methodology is different, but the destination they're pointing toward may be the same. It's important, however, not to overstate or oversimplify these findings. The science of meditation is still young, and many of the studies have been small in scale or limited in their design. Correlation is not causation, and the fact that experienced meditators show certain brain patterns doesn't necessarily mean that meditation caused those patterns. It's possible that people with certain brain characteristics are more drawn to meditation in the first place. The most honest assessment is that the science is promising, that it's broadly consistent with the traditional claims of Zen practice, and that much more research is needed. What science does offer, at the very least, is a framework for understanding Zazen in terms that are accessible to people who might not resonate with traditional Buddhist language. If you're not comfortable talking about dropping away of body and mind, or seeing your original nature, you can think of Zazen as a practice that quiets the default mode network, strengthens the brain's attention systems, and promotes neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize and adapt. These are not spiritual claims. They are empirical observations, and they suggest that the monks who have been sitting Zazen for centuries were onto something real, something measurable, something that modern instruments can begin to detect. But here's the crucial point, and it's one that Dogen would probably approve of. Zazen is not about brain waves. It's not about gray matter density. It's not about optimizing your neural circuitry. These things may be interesting and even useful side effects, but they are not the point. The point of Zazen is Zazen. The point of sitting is sitting. If you sit Zazen in order to improve your brain, you're missing something essential. You're turning the practice into a means to an end, which is precisely the kind of instrumentalizing, goal-oriented thinking that Zazen is designed to dissolve. Which brings us to what might be the most important question of all. What does Zazen look like when it leaves the cushion? What happens when you stand up after sitting? How does this practice connect to the rest of your life? The messy, complicated, endlessly demanding rest of your life. In Dogen's understanding, Zazen is not something you do for 30 minutes a day and then forget about. It is a way of being that permeates everything. When you eat with the same quality of attention you bring to the cushion. When you walk with presence. When you wash the dishes, you wash the dishes, not thinking about something else, not rushing to get them done so you can move on to the next activity. Just washing the dishes. Feel the warm water on your hands, hearing the clink of plates, being fully, completely, wholly right here with this apparently mundane activity. This is what the Zen tradition means when it talks about practice in daily life. It's not that you walk around in some elevated, detached, otherworldly state. It's much simpler than that. It's that you bring a quality of full engagement to whatever you're doing. Dogen wrote extensively about this. He wrote a text called the Tenzo Kyokan, Instructions for the Cook, in which he described the monastery cook's duties as a form of the highest spiritual practice: washing rice, chopping vegetables, tending the fire. These are not interruptions to practice. They are practicing. Every moment, every activity, every encounter is an opportunity to express the same awake presence that Zazen cultivates. There's a famous Zen saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The activities don't change. The external life may look exactly the same, but the quality of attention, the depth of presence, the freedom from the constant inner commentary and evaluation and judgment, that changes everything, and changes it in ways that are subtle but profound. Let's explore this idea of Zazen off the cushion a little more deeply, because it's central to understanding why Zen has endured for so long and why it continues to attract practitioners in the modern world. One of the most common misunderstandings about meditation is that it's an escape from the world. People imagine that meditators are retreating into some private inner realm, walling themselves off from the chaos and pain of ordinary existence, and some forms of meditation do tend in that direction, toward transcendence, toward altered states, toward experiences that are qualitatively different from everyday consciousness. But Zen, and Zazen in particular, moves in the opposite direction. Zazen is not about escaping the world. It's about arriving more fully in the world. It's about being more present, more engaged, more awake to the actual textures and flavors of this life, this moment, this breath. The Zen ideal is not the meditator sealed away in a cave, lost in blissful absorption. It's the monk sweeping the temple courtyard at dawn, fully present with each stroke of the broom. It's the tea master pouring water with such attention that the simple act of making tea becomes a ceremony of awareness. It's the calligrapher holding the brush with such stillness that the ink flows as a direct expression of the moment. There's a Chinese Chan text called the Xingxin Ming, attributed to the third patriarch Senkan, that says, "The great way is not difficult for those who do not pick and choose." This doesn't mean you should have no preferences at all. It means that the suffering we create for ourselves often comes from our constant judging, comparing, evaluating, and wishing things were different. If the weather is cold, we want it to be warm. If the line is long, we want it to be short. If the person in front of us is slow, we want them to be fast. This constant friction between what is and what we want generates a background hum of dissatisfaction that colors our entire experience. Zazen reveals this pattern. Sitting on the cushion, you see it in miniature. A thought arises that you don't like, and immediately the mind tries to push it away. A pleasant sensation arises, and the mind tries to hold on to it. An itch appears, and the whole body tenses with the desire to scratch. Over and over, this dance of grasping and aversion plays out, and over time, you begin to see it not just on the cushion, but in every aspect of your life, in how you relate to food, to money, to relationships, to your own self-image. And this seeing itself is liberating. You don't have to do anything about it, at least not in the way the mind usually understands doing. You just have to see it clearly, because when you see the pattern clearly, the pattern begins to lose its power. Not all at once, not permanently, but gradually, incrementally, moment by moment, the grip loosens. The Japanese have a concept called wabi-sabi, which is deeply connected to Zen aesthetics. Wabi-sabi is the appreciation of beauty that is imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. A chipped tea bowl, a weathered stone, a branch with a few fading blossoms. These things are beautiful not in spite of their imperfections, but because of them. They are beautiful because they are real, because they bear the marks of time and use and change. Zazen cultivates a wabi-sabi sensibility toward experience itself. When you stop demanding that every moment be perfect, when you stop filtering your experience through ideas of how things should be, you begin to notice the beauty in how things actually are. The morning light on the kitchen counter becomes interesting. The sound of rain on the window becomes musical. The face of the person sitting across from you becomes endlessly fascinating. Not because anything has changed in the external world, but because you're finally paying attention. The Zen master Hakuin once said that meditation in the midst of activity is 100, 1,000, 10,000 times superior to meditation in stillness. Now, this is a deliberate provocation, not a literal ranking. Hakuin is not saying that sitting Zazen is worthless. He's saying that the real test of practice is what happens when you get up from the cushion. Can you maintain that quality of presence while you're cooking breakfast? While you're navigating a difficult conversation with a colleague? While you're stuck in a traffic jam? While you're dealing with illness or grief or uncertainty? This is the real frontier of Zazen. Not what happens in the rarefied atmosphere of the meditation hall, but what happens in the ordinary, unremarkable moments that make up the vast majority of human life. And the extraordinary claim of the Zen tradition is that these ordinary moments, when met with full presence and attention, are not ordinary at all. They are the very substance of awakening. Dogen expressed this with his characteristic precision. He said, "Enlightenment is intimacy with all things, not understanding all things, not mastery of all things. Intimacy, the kind of closeness that comes from really being with something, really touching it, really allowing yourself to be affected by it without defense or distance. This is what Zazen builds over time, sit by sit, breath by breath, a capacity for intimacy with your own experience. An ability to be here, fully here, without reservation, without agenda, without the constant mental commentary that usually stands between us and the raw fact of being alive. Let me give a concrete example. Say you're stuck in traffic. The car in front of you is moving at a crawl. You're going to be late. Now, the habitual response for most of us is a cascade of stress, tightening of the jaw, quickening of the breath, a narrative of frustration and blame. Why is this happening? This is unacceptable. I should have taken the other route. This person in front of me is an idiot. And so on. The suffering is not caused by the traffic. The traffic is just a fact. The suffering is caused by our resistance to the fact, by the gap between what is happening and what we want to be happening. A person with a regular Zazen practice might notice all of that arising. The tightening, the frustration, the narrative, and instead of getting swept away by it, they might simply observe it. Oh, there's the tension in the jaw. There's the quickening breath. There's the story about how this shouldn't be happening. And in that simple act of observation, something shifts. The identification loosens. You're no longer the frustrated person in traffic. You're the awareness that is watching a frustrated person in traffic. And from that slight distance, the whole thing becomes, if not pleasant, at least manageable. The grip of reactivity loosens, and in that loosening, there is freedom. This is not about suppressing emotions or pretending everything is fine. It's about seeing clearly. It's about being honest with what's actually happening, internally and externally, without adding layers of narrative and judgment on top of it. And this capacity, this ability to see clearly and respond rather than react, this is what Zazen builds. It builds it slowly. There's no dramatic overnight transformation. Nobody sits Zazen for a week and walks out a completely different person. The changes are gradual, accumulating over months and years of consistent practice, like the slow wearing of water on stone. You might notice, after some months of sitting, that you're a little less reactive in difficult situations, that you listen a little more carefully when someone is talking to you, that you're a little less caught up in your own stories and opinions, that the quiet moments, the in-between moments, the moments that used to feel empty or boring, now feel full and alive. And here's something that Shunryu Suzuki stressed again and again. There is no endpoint. There is no "I've arrived." There is no final destination where you can say, "I've mastered Zazen." Every seat is a beginner's seat. Every breath is a new breath. Every moment is completely fresh and completely unknown. The whole point of beginner's mind is that you never graduate from it. The beginner's mind is not a stage you pass through. It is the mind itself, when it is free from the burden of what it thinks it already knows. Zazen asks us to accept ourselves as we are, right now, in this moment, with all our restlessness and confusion and yearning and doubt. It does not ask us to become something different. It asks us to see what we already are, and what we already are, according to the Zen tradition, is vast, luminous, free, and intimately connected to everything else in the universe. That sounds like a big claim, and it is. But Zazen doesn't ask you to believe it. It asks you to sit down and find out for yourself. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep, or as you sit quietly wherever you are, consider this. The practice we've been exploring together for these last couple of hours is, in essence, the simplest thing in the world. Sit down, straighten your back, breathe, be here, that's it, that's all. And it's enough, more than enough. It's everything. 2,500 years of unbroken transmission. From the Buddha under his tree, to Bodhidharma facing his wall, to Dogen in his mountain monastery, to Shunryu Suzuki in San Francisco, to the thousands of people sitting in zendos and living rooms and offices and hospitals and prisons around the world right now, in this very moment. All of it comes down to this single, radical, irreducible act, sitting still and paying attention. You don't need a special cushion. You don't need to read 100 books. You don't need to travel to Japan. You don't need to shave your head or wear robes or call yourself a Buddhist. You just need a place to sit and a willingness to be present with whatever shows up. The great Zen master Yunmen was once asked, "What is the teaching of the Buddha's whole lifetime?" He answered, "An appropriate response. An appropriate response, not a grand philosophy, not a complex system, just meeting each moment with whatever that moment calls for, washing the dish when it needs washing, answering the phone when the phone rings, sitting still when it's time to sit still, and letting each of those moments be complete in itself, not a stepping stone to something else, but the thing itself. This is Zazen. This is the art of seated meditation, and it is available to you right now, wherever you are, exactly as you are. And there's one more dimension of Zazen off the cushion that deserves attention. How it affects the way we relate to other people. One of the quiet, unannounced effects of regular Zazen practice is a gradual softening of the boundary between self and other. When you spend time each day simply being present, without defending or projecting or performing, you begin to develop a capacity for genuine listening, not the kind of listening where you're waiting for the other person to stop talking so you can say what you've been rehearsing. Real listening. The kind where you actually take in what the other person is saying and feeling, where you allow yourself to be affected by their presence, without immediately rushing to judge, fix, advise, or respond. This is rarer than we think. Most of us, most of the time, are engaged in what might be called transactional listening, a mode of communication in which we're primarily tracking how what the other person is saying relates to our own needs, opinions, and agenda. Zazen, by training us to set aside our agenda and be present with whatever arises, gradually cultivates a different kind of attention, one that is more spacious, more receptive, more genuinely curious about the other person's experience. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen master who combined meditation with social activism, spoke often about what he called deep listening, the practice of listening to another person with the sole intention of helping them to express what they are feeling. This is not a technique separate from Zazen. It is an extension of the same quality of attention that Zazen develops. On the cushion, you learn to listen to your own thoughts and feelings without judgment. Off the cushion, you extend that same non-judgmental attention to the people around you. The result, over time, is a subtle but real shift in the quality of your relationships. Arguments don't escalate as quickly because you're able to pause before reacting. Misunderstandings are more easily resolved because you're actually hearing what the other person is trying to say. Compassion arises more naturally because when you stop defending yourself against other people's pain, you can actually feel it. And that feeling, far from being overwhelming, turns out to be deeply connecting. Dogen said that to forget the self is to be enlightened by the 10,000 things. 10,000 things in Zen parlance is everything. Every person, every tree, every raindrop, every sound, every moment. To be enlightened by them means to let them in, to let them affect you, to let the world be your teacher moment by moment instead of holding it at arm's length. And this, ultimately, is the deepest gift of Zazen. Not calm, not concentration, not brain health, not even enlightenment, at least not in the way most people imagine it. The deepest gift is connection, a return to the intimacy with life that we knew as children before the armor of self-consciousness and the habits of distraction sealed us off from it. Zazen doesn't add anything to your life. It removes what was blocking you from fully experiencing the life you already have. There's a passage in the Fukan Zazengi that I keep coming back to again and again because it captures something essential about what this practice asks of us. Dogen writes, "You have already been given a human body which is vital, so do not spend your time in vain. Do not spend your time in vain." There is an urgency in those words, but not the frantic urgency of productivity culture, not the breathless insistence that you need to accomplish more, produce more, optimize more. It's a different kind of urgency. The urgency of a person who has realized that this life, this moment, this breath, is not a rehearsal. It is the real thing, and it will not last forever. The awareness of impermanence is central to Buddhist teaching, and it runs through the practice of Zazen like a deep underground river. When you sit Zazen, you are sitting in the presence of impermanence. Your body will age and change and eventually cease to function. Your thoughts and feelings are arising and passing away even now as you listen to these words. The seasons turn. The people you love will one day be gone, and you too will be gone. This is not morbid. In the Zen understanding, it is the most liberating truth there is. Because when you truly accept impermanence, when you stop fighting it and pretending it doesn't apply to you, something remarkable happens. Everything becomes precious. This cup of tea becomes precious because it will never be this cup of tea again. This conversation becomes precious because it is happening once and only once. This moment, this breath, this heartbeat, precious beyond measure, because it is real and it is here, and it will not come again. Zazen opens the door to this kind of seeing, not all at once, not through any dramatic revelation, but slowly, quietly, one sitting at a time. The practice teaches you to pay attention to what is actually in front of you. And what is actually in front of you, when you really look at it, is astonishing. The Zen poet Ryokan, who lived in early 19th century Japan, spent much of his life as a wandering monk, playing with children and writing poetry. He had no temple of his own, no title, no institutional standing. He lived in a small hut, sat in Zazen, and looked at the moon. One of his poems reads, in translation, simply, "The thief left it behind, the moon at my window." A thief broke into Ryokan's hut and, finding nothing worth stealing, left, and Ryokan's response was not anger or fear, but a kind of wistful tenderness. If only he could have given the thief the moon. That quality, that spaciousness, that generosity of spirit, that is what Zazen, practiced faithfully over a lifetime, can produce, not always, not for everyone, and certainly not on demand, but as a possibility, as a direction, as a way of being that is available to any human being willing to sit down and be still. It is there, always there, waiting for us to notice. If you've enjoyed this journey through the history, practice, and spirit of Zazen, and if it has offered you even a moment of stillness or a flicker of curiosity, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us reach more people who might be looking for this kind of quiet, reflective content. And if you have questions about anything we've covered tonight, or if you'd like to share your own experiences with Zazen, please leave a comment. This channel is a community, and your voice matters. Until next time, sit well, breathe easy, and remember, the way is right where you are.